The English Revolution or the English Civil War. You can call it whatever you like, but usually in the exam they call it the English Revolution, so I'm just saying that to remind you, okay? So this one was 1642 to really through to 49, okay? So the English Civil War lasted for 6 years, and then there was a little bit of a gap, and then obviously there was the execution of Charles I. So let's think of the causes then. Now, there's so many causes of the English Revolution. Don't panic if you can't remember them all. I'm going to go through a few here, and this will be more than enough to be able to write about. So, one of the biggest causes of the English Revolution was Charles I himself. Because Charles I was meant to be ruling a Protestant country, yet he'd married a Catholic called Henrietta Maria. So that made people think, oh, he's going to be Catholic. And this was a bit shocking, really, because his father, James I, had suffered from loads and loads of Catholic plots. So obviously he wasn't happy in terms of that, because, you know, people were thinking, well, I thought we were going to be Protestant, and actually your father suffered from Catholic plots against you, yet you're being a Catholic. So that was a problem. And another thing that made it obvious that he had Catholic leanings was the fact that Archbishop Laud had written a new prayer book for him, and most of the things in this new prayer book were Catholic. So there's a big issue going to take place here, because the people in England just wanted to be Protestant. So he was unpopular because of that. But they probably could have just about lived with the religion thing. But there was also other things that he did. For example, he believed in the divine right of kings. So he thought he was divinely appointed by God, so he absolutely didn't need to answer to any person on earth. So Parliament and the people saw this as really arrogant, because he just wouldn't listen to anybody else. And also, he wanted money to fight the Scots in wars and things, because they wouldn't accept this new prayer book. And every time he wanted money, and money to spend on his friends and favourites and things, what he did is he started to do an illegal tax. So he taxed them something called ship money. Now, that should only be done on coastal areas, but he was taxing everybody this. So really it was illegal what he was doing, but he was having to do that because he refused to meet Parliament. He actually didn't meet Parliament for 11 years. And this period is called Charles's personal rule, when he just rules on his own for 11 years. So obviously he upset an awful lot of people in England by doing that tax. And also his character, he was just really unpopular. And in comparison to like some of the MPs, like Pym and Hampden and Cromwell and people, he just wasn't the most popular. So obviously that didn't go down very well in terms of personalities there. And as well, something that really got to the people is you should always now, after the Simon de Montfort era, it should be always that a king rules with Parliament. Well, when Parliament met him in 1628, they basically said to him, here is a petition of right, here are some of the complaints we have and the way we expect you to be ruling. But what he did when he read it is he went, okay, I'm not going to meet you anymore. So he literally dissolved Parliament for 11 years. Now that just shows what a corrupt ruler he was, because really he was charging people taxes but with no representation, and all his friends and favourites and things were obviously benefiting from this money. So it was really annoying for the people of England, and also Parliament had just had enough. But there's absolutely always a trigger event for these different things, and the trigger for this was when he decided to recall Parliament because he needed more money to fight the Scots, and he just had ran out of ways of being able to tax his people. What happened is he met them for 3 weeks, and then he tried to dissolve them again. So what they did when obviously they met him again, they gave him something called the Grand Remonstrance, which is basically 204 complaints or grievances, if you like, saying this is how you should be definitely ruling England. So in terms of what happens then, he doesn't want to hear any of this. So he wants to dissolve Parliament again. But what they've put in this Grand Remonstrance is things like that only Parliament should be able to dissolve Parliament. There should be no tax without representation. And also that he has to meet with Parliament. So these are things that are basic things that have been set down really hundreds of years before. But then he goes into Parliament and tries to arrest 5 MPs. two of which were Pym and Hampden, and they'd already flown the nest because people had told them he was coming. But Cromwell had stayed there, and at that point it was like, no, you've gone too far. We've warned you that if you continue to do that, there is going to be a civil war, and that's exactly what happened. So the Civil War itself, the English Civil War, it began in 1642, and this was the King versus Parliament, so the Cavaliers v the Roundheads. So in terms of this, it was really, really distressing for everyone involved, because a civil war means it divided families and it divided the country. So sometimes brother fought against brother. Many people in the countryside supported the king because they didn't really understand what was going on. A lot of the people in the town supported Parliament because they thought he was ruling unjustly. So it really did divide the country. And for the first 3 years of the Civil War, Parliament were really, really struggling. And Oliver Cromwell, who was helping to lead the Parliament army, absolutely recognised that if they continued on like they were, there was no way they were going to defeat the king. Because he had the better army, he had more money, more resources, so there was a big problem here. So he decided, Cromwell, to do something called the New Model Army. So he took some time out of all these different battles, he trained them up, they got 8 pence a day, which is good money in those days. They were a professional fighting force, they didn't have any other jobs, they just did the training when they weren't battling, so that was obviously, you know, helping them. And they had better weapons, they learned tactics, so when they went to then Naseby in 1645, which is just near Nottingham area, they managed to turn the tide of the Civil War. Because although they had less men in this battle than the king did, they managed to win because of the tactics, because of how well trained they were and things like that. So after that, they started to win the battles and they won the Civil War. And they managed to take him as prisoner. So Charles I became a prisoner. Now, you'd think that it was all sorted then. But the big problem was, what should they do with the king? Well, in terms of what they should do with the king, this was difficult. And they had something called the Putney debates. So Putney is a place in London. And Cromwell had basically said to them, who do you want to have the last say on and what happens to the king? Do we put him on trial? What do we do with him? And no one could decide. So in the end, Cromwell said, okay, property owners are going to make a decision in terms of what happens to the King of England. And they decide to put him on trial for treason. So he goes on trial for treason and he's really disrespectful to the court. He doesn't see why he should be there. Why is he being, asked all these questions by these people? He's divinely appointed by God, so he has a really arrogant presence when he's there. So in the end, he gets found guilty of treason and he's sentenced to death, so he's going to be executed. So Cromwell puts the first signature on the death warrant and then there's 52 other signatures go on there as well. Now, in terms of the execution, he's executed on the 30th of January 1649. And to be quite honest, it's significant because nobody actually thought they would kill the king. And even people who weren't keen on him, who fought against him in the Civil War, they were hugely shocked when he was actually executed. So he does his little speech on the scaffold that he's going to go from an imperfect world to a perfect one, all those sorts of things. And also something else that happens is they have to have 2 executioners because obviously in case one of them bottles out, someone else needs to do it. They have masks completely fastened to the face so it's out of the glare of God, and also people won't have any recriminations on them because in terms of it, like some people didn't want the king to be killed, so that would be a problem. So when he's executed, they hold his head up and it's behold the head of a traitor, and all the king's guards have to be round the scaffold because they're worried that someone would have tried to help him escape. And then people rush forward at the end to dip handkerchiefs in the blood as a souvenir and things. Now, in terms of it, the thing that's really sort of bizarre about this in a way is the crowd were absolutely silent, then shocked, and they gasped because somebody killing the king is not what people expected to happen, because that had never been done before and it's not been done since. Not the person who's the actual monarch, who bloodline actually went through to take them onto the English throne. So it is a massively significant event. And the bit that happens after is also significant because Oliver Cromwell takes over the running of England and it becomes a republic. So it's a republic from 1649 to 1660. And the idea was Cromwell was going to rule with Parliament, and he had every intention of doing that. But Parliament were making such a mess of things, in the end he had to make himself Lord Protector in 1653. And they offered him the crown, but he didn't want to be King of England because he said, we've just cut the head off the king. I don't want to be King of England. And the idea had been that he'd rule with Parliament. But in the end, he had to really rule with the army to take charge, so he became a little bit of a dictator. So some historians think he was a dictator, some think he was a hero. It's up in the air, no one can actually completely decide. And in terms of what he did in Ireland, he put down a rebellion in Ireland and killed a lot of people, and some of them in a church, so some people think that was terrible in terms of what he did there. And because he was a really strict Puritan, he had very, very strong rules on what should happen at Christmas, what should happen in terms of entertainments, and, you know, it was against feast days and things like that, so he became unpopular because of that. But what he did manage to show was that you could actually rule without a king or queen. So when he dies of malaria in 1658, his son takes over for a period of time. But to be quite honest, his son doesn't really want to do this. So in the end, what they have to do is they have to call back Charles's son, Charles II, and what he does is this period is called the Restoration. He is then a king again, so they restore the monarchy. So if the monarchy hadn't been restored at that point, we may still be looking at just being a republic today, so this was really significant. And then the period following Charles II became known as the Glorious Revolution because Charles II had no children with his wife. So the throne was going to go to his brother, James, but unfortunately James II was a Catholic and people didn't want a Catholic on the throne. But luckily James II had a daughter called Mary. Now she married William of Orange, who was coming over from the Netherlands, who was a strong Protestant. And he came with his army, so it looked like it was going to be some sort of invasion or something, but it wasn't because he married Mary and Parliament said, you can rule the country as king as long as we're absolutely sure that you'll rule with Parliament, and he agreed to that. So that's what the little Glorious Revolution part is at the end. That's something that's really significant in terms of that. So all of those things, okay, are to do with the English Civil War, but obviously you could get a question about the execution of King Charles on its own, the significance. You could get a question about Oliver Cromwell. You could get a question about just the English Civil War and the causes itself. So all those things are included in this podcast.